Hi everybody, this is Mrs. Martin, and today we're going to talk about theme. We've been working on theme for a couple of different activities now, so it should not be news to you that a theme is a unifying idea that shows the author's opinion repeatedly in a story. Now, this isn't something that should be surprising. It's something that we've already kind of touched base on. The idea that there are some ideas that pop up in a story multiple times. When we were reading the book 910, there were certain ideas that kept popping up to the surface. Think about Will Rittenhouse and his dad. The message his dad constantly was drilling into his head was do the right thing, do the right thing, do the right thing. That's part of a theme. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to find themes like that in stories in just a moment. But a few hints before we go too much further. When we are looking for a theme, it's never going to be something that's stated by the author. It always must be inferred by the reader. You're never going to have an author come out and say, and by the way, the theme of the story is. That just does not happen in young adult or adult fiction. So it's something that you have to think about after having read the whole book and looking at the repeated patterns in that book. Okay? Another important point about theme is that it always applies to real life and all people. So it should not matter the time period of the story. It should not matter the cultural background of the story. If you're looking for a theme in a story, it should be applicable to all people in real life. And most importantly of all, it should always be supported through the details of the story. If it's truly a theme that belongs to that story, it's something that you should be able to prove using the details from that story. So let's take a look at what it is not. Theme is not a one-word answer. We have something called a theme topic, which can be one word, but an actual theme is a statement. So let's add that up here. Always a complete statement. Okay? So theme is not a one-word answer. That's a theme topic, which is something a little bit different. It is not directly stated. We already talked about that. You always have to infer. And it is not necessarily a moral or lesson. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. So be very careful when you're working with theme. It's not a synonym for a moral or a lesson. It actually is something different because the author's opinion may not necessarily be something that's positive or upbeat, like a moral or a lesson. Okay, so that's the basics on theme. It's going to be something that you're going to work with not just this year, but next year in 8th grade, as well as in high school. So there are some basic steps to follow when you are looking for a theme in a story. So let's start with step 1, which is read the whole book. You cannot determine the theme of a book before you have finished reading it. It is not possible. And it's not possible to get the theme from a book if you've only read one chapter. So you have to see how the author repeats certain ideas throughout the story in order to arrive at a conclusion about what really matters to the author and what the author is actually trying to teach. Number 2, list the topics or ideas that repeat in the book. This is called a theme topic. So let's think back to the book 910, okay? Way back in the day when we read 910, we had the character Will Rittenhouse, right? And Will Rittenhouse was taught by his dad to do the right thing. And it comes up when Will is remembering the party that he had when he was 10 years old, where there was one kid he didn't want to invite, and his dad was like, hey, you got to do the right thing, right? So doing the right thing is something that is repeated through the book, and we see it at the end of the book, obviously, when Will sees Nahid's family being picked on at Ground Zero, and he remembers his dad's voice saying, do the right thing. So this idea does repeat for us in that story. It's certainly something we discussed at the time. So it's definitely a great theme topic. Okay. What about the idea of stereotypes? Right? We had, in the very beginning of the book, Sergio in the airport seeing Nahid and, not thinking anything big about it, but the kid he was with was like, oh, look at her, what's up with her? She wears something over her head. So that right off the bat shows you that stereotyping is going to be an issue. And it is something that Nahid deals with throughout her section of the reading because of the fact that Eliza keeps bringing her differences to the surface, and the other kids and the way they react to it make Nahid really uncomfortable. So that idea of stereotyping and outright prejudice definitely comes up and repeats in that novel. So we've got some theme topics that we've determined will work. But then how do we turn them into actual theme statements? That's the question, right? So let's get back in here and take a look. So as far as 9-10 is concerned, our next step would be to use something called a sentence stem. A sentence stem tells you how to start a sentence. So in your brain, you need to come up with a sentence that starts with, the author believes that. Okay? Now, you have to ask yourself what the author believes about one of these theme topics. And that's going to lead you to the ability to create a theme statement, which is what we really want. So, if our stem is the author believes that, then we just have to fill in the blank. And I just want to point out to you, this stem is going to work for every single story you deal with ever, okay? Whether it's science fiction, realistic fiction, the author believes that is a sentence stem that's going to be able to work for you every single time you read a story and are trying to look for the theme. So, what does the author believe about doing the right thing? Well, Will shows us that doing the right thing is important even when it's difficult, right? So even though his party would have been better without the weird kid invited, it was a difficult choice. He did the right thing. Even though it was difficult to stand up for Nahid's family, especially when there was a crowd of strangers around him and he didn't know how they would react, he did the right thing even though it was difficult. So doing the right thing is important even when it's difficult. The author believes that that matters, okay? What does the author believe about stereotypes? Well, the author shows us through Nahid's story is that stereotypes are hurtful and prevent people from truly knowing each other. If Eliza could have looked past Nahid's differences and maybe not scrutinized them or questioned her so much about them, they might have had an easier beginning to their friendship. They might have had an easier time connecting and relating to each other. Okay? What about prejudice? What does the author believe about prejudice? Well, if we take a look at that last scene, prejudice is dangerous, divisive, and keeps people from connecting, right? That service on September 11th, 2002 was supposed to be a place of connecting, of people healing their pain by getting together and really trying to understand each other. And unfortunately, that could not happen when you had somebody standing there saying, you don't belong here. What country are you from? Right? I mean, it definitely got in the way, and it was the opposite of what the purpose of that day was. So Now, the next step when we are really looking for a theme is to revise and check. And what I mean by that is we're going to get rid of that sentence stem. The author believes that. We're going to kill that off because we honestly don't need it now, right? Because we've already come up with our theme statements. Now, when we check it, we've got to make sure that these are complete sentences without that sentence stem. So, doing the right thing is important even when it's difficult. That's a complete sentence. Stereotypes are hurtful and prevent people from truly knowing each other. That is a complete sentence. Prejudice is dangerous, divisive, and keeps people from connecting. That is a complete sentence. So I can just pop a period at the end of these bad boys, and they are good to go as theme statements. So once you revise, you should have complete sentences that are theme statements. And that's what a theme is right there. Okay? The checking part also involves going back to the story and making sure you can find evidence. So, in the case of doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, we already talked about the fact that this really does apply to Will, right? Specifically, the advice his dad gave him. When we think about the stereotypes being hurtful, we know this comes from Nahid and her dealings with her classmates. And when we think about prejudice and how it keeps people from connecting, we really are looking at the 9/11/2002 service in that book. So it looks like what we have done is found the theme for 9/10. Here's your challenge. I need you now to work with a partner and talk through a theme for the outsiders. So start off by brainstorming topics, things that repeat in the book. Then you are going to try to turn those topics into theme statements by using the sentence starter, the author believes that. And then you are going to come up with complete sentences that you have revised and checked. Make sure you do that part to make sure that the evidence from the story actually supports what you've come up with. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to do this, and then we're going to discuss them as a whole class. If you have any questions while you work, you know that you can either raise your hand if you're in person, or if you're at home, throw it into the chat, and I'll be happy to help you. Good luck.